When the lawyer read my husband, Williams, will my son Robert leaned back in his chair with a cocky smile and said, "Finally, the millions are mine." He was so confident, so certain he'd gotten what he wanted after years of manipulating me and making me believe I was a burden in his life. For 3 years, he and his wife Jennifer treated me like a servant in my own home, making me clean, cook, and care for their grandchildren while they spent the money my husband had left in a joint account. They even told me I should be grateful they let me live in the house I'd lived in 42 years. But when Mr. Thompson, the family lawyer, cleared his throat and pointed to me, saying, "She's the real heir," Robert's smile instantly disappeared. What he didn't know was that his father had discovered all about his greed long before he died. The truth behind this inheritance and what I did after discovering how they planned to throw me into a nursing home will leave you speechless. If you've made it this far, you probably recognize that families aren't always what we imagine, right? Maybe you've experienced situations where people close to you tried to take advantage of you, or maybe you're just looking for stories that make you reflect on the complexities of family relationships. Here on this channel, you'll find a safe space where real stories like mine are told without judgment. These stories will move you, make you reflect, and perhaps even help you better understand your own experiences. This channel was created for people like us who know that real life sometimes surpasses any fiction. Subscribe to the channel and be part of this community where every story matters and where you're always welcome. Together, we transform pain into wisdom and difficult stories into moments of growth. Now, let me tell you exactly how this whole situation began and how I discovered that sometimes justice comes when we least expect it. My name is Margaret, and at 73 years of age, I never imagined I would experience one of the most painful and simultaneously liberating experiences of my life. For 42 years. I was married to William Patterson, an extraordinary man who built a construction company from scratch and managed to amass a considerable fortune through decades of hard work. William was the kind of man who woke up at 5 in the morning every day, even on weekends, always with some project in mind or some construction project to oversee. Our life together was built on love, mutual respect, and many shared dreams. We lived in a 2-story house in a quiet residential neighborhood in Denver, Colorado. It was a home William had built with his own hands shortly after we married, each brick laid with care, each room planned with our family's future in mind. The house had 5 bedrooms, a large living room with a fireplace, a spacious kitchen where I loved to prepare meals for the family, and a huge garden where William grew tomatoes and I tended the roses. Robert, our only son, was born 3 years after our wedding. From an early age, he demonstrated himself to be an intelligent child, but also very spoiled. William had enormous difficulties saying no to the boy, always justifying himself by wanting to give his son everything he himself had missed out on as a child. I tried to balance this excessive generosity with boundaries and discipline, but I confess that I often gave in to William's requests to avoid creating conflict in the marriage. Robert grew up accustomed to having everything he wanted without having to work too hard to get it. When he turned 16, his father gave him a new car. At 18, William paid for his entire college degree in business administration, including housing, food, and a generous allowance for personal expenses. Even after graduation, Robert remained financially dependent on his parents, always with some excuse or project that required initial investment. It was at the age of 28 that Robert met Jennifer Mills at a friend's party. Jennifer was a 25-year-old nurse, blonde, friendly, and apparently very much in love with my son. When Robert brought her to meet us, I was immediately smitten. Jennifer was polite, affectionate, always complimented my cooking, and said I was exactly the kind of mother-in-law she always dreamed of having. She seemed genuinely interested in being part of our family. Their wedding took place 2 years later in June of 2008. William DeKay paid for the entire ceremony, which cost about $40,000. It was a beautiful party at the town's country club with 200 guests imported, flowers, and a band that played until 2 in the morning. Jennifer was radiant in her 8-ounce sundolar wedding dress, and Robert finally seemed mature and ready to take on adult responsibilities. As a wedding gift, William gave them full payment on a house worth $350,000. It was a beautiful house in a gated community with 3 bedrooms, 2 suites, a pool, and a gourmet area. I thought Robert would finally have the motivation to establish himself professionally and build his own independent life. Once again, I was wrong. The first few years of their marriage seemed to go smoothly. Jennifer became pregnant within the first year, and Emma was born in March 2009. Becoming a grandmother was one of the most exciting experiences of my life. That red-haired greenied girl instantly became the light of my life. I visited Jennifer and the baby every day, picked up prepared meals, helped with the housework, and cared for Emma whenever Jennifer needed rest. William was also completely in love with his granddaughter. He would come home from work and run to pick Emma up, chatting with her as if she understood every word. On weekends, our house would transform into an amusement park for his granddaughter. William built a swing set in the garden, bought an inflatable pool, and I filled an entire with toys, clothes, and everything a child could want. Michael was born 3 years later in September 2012. A boy with brown hair and blue eyes like his father, but with his mother's sweet and affectionate personality. With 2 grandchildren to care for and pamper, my life became even busier and happier. Jennifer had stopped working as a nurse after Emma's birth, saying she preferred to dedicate herself full-time to caring for the children. It was around this time that I began to notice the first changes in Robert and Jennifer's behavior. They began visiting our home more frequently, but they always came with some kind of financial request. First, it was to replace Jennifer's car, which she said wasn't safe enough to transport the children. William didn't hesitate to give them $25,000 to buy a new SUV. Next came the remodeling of their kitchen, which Jennifer said was too small for a family with 2 children. Another $15,000. Next, they needed to renovate the children's bedroom, buy new furniture for the living room, replace the air conditioning, and renovate the pool area. Each request came with a seemingly reasonable justification, always related to the well-being of the grandchildren or the family's safety. What bothered me most was how casually they made these requests. It wasn't a favor or a loan anymore. It was almost a demand. Robert would come home and say, "Dad, I need $30,000 for this or that," as if it were his right to have access to William's money. And my husband, always generous and concerned for the family's well-being, never said no. I even questioned whether we weren't overdoing it with the financial support. But William always told me that's what family is for, to help each other through difficult times. He argued that Robert was still establishing himself professionally and that it was natural for parents to help their children at this stage of life. What none of us knew at the time was that Robert wasn't even trying to establish himself professionally. He had quit his job at a marketing firm soon after their marriage and was living solely off the money he received from his parents. During the first 10 years of Robert and Jennifer's marriage, I estimate William gave them over $5.7.8. It was always in amounts of sure arse. $3,000 justified by specific needs or investment opportunities that never materialized. Robert even mentioned that he was considering starting his own company but needed seed money. William was so excited about the idea that he gave him $100,000 outright to start the business. The company never got off the ground. When we asked about the project's progress, Robert always had a new excuse. First, he was waiting for the documentation to be finalized, then it was a matter of finding the ideal location, and then he needed to hire qualified employees. 2 years passed and nothing happened. The $100,000 simply disappeared, spent on travel, expensive clothes, restaurants, and other luxuries. Robert and Jennifer indulged in things began to get more complicated about 5 years ago when William began showing the first signs of health problems. He was 73 at the time and began experiencing constant back pain and excessive fatigue. Initially, we thought it was simply the result of decades of heavy physical labor in construction, but tests revealed something much more serious. The diagnosis came as a devastating shock. William had aggressive prostate cancer that had already spread to other organs. The doctors were honest with us from the beginning, explaining that treatment could slow the progression of the disease, but that a cure was virtually unheard of. William had between 2 and 5 years to live, depending on how his body responded to treatment. The news devastated the entire family. I cried for weeks, unable to accept that I would lose the man I loved after a lifetime together. Robert was visibly shaken, but his reaction was different from mine. While I focused on enjoying every remaining moment with William and making his final years as comfortable as possible, Robert seemed preoccupied with practical and financial matters. It was around this time that Robert and Jennifer suggested that it would be best for them to move into our home to help me care for William during his treatment. At first, the idea seemed wonderful. I could really use some help caring for a patient and having the children around would certainly brighten the difficult days ahead. William was also excited about the possibility of spending more time with his grandchildren during his final years. In August 2020, Robert, Jennifer, and the children moved into our house. They sold the condominium and said the money would be used to pay for William's alternative treatments or any emergencies that arose. At the time, I thought it was a demonstration of love and dedication to the family. How wrong I was. The first few months were even reasonable. Jennifer really helped me with William's basic care, like giving him his medications on time and accompanying him to doctor's appointments. Robert took over the family finances, claiming, "I was too emotional and overwhelmed to handle practical matters like paying bills and investing." The children filled the house with joy and activity, which seemed to be good for William when he was feeling better. But little by little, I began to notice subtle changes that deeply bothered me. Jennifer rearranged the entire home decor without consulting me, saying she needed to make the space more functional for caring for a patient. She removed paintings I'd hung on the walls for decades, rearranged furniture, changed the curtains, and even replaced my favorite china with a more modern set she considered more practical. When I complained about these changes, Jennifer responded with a condescending tone I'd never heard before. She said she understood it was difficult for me to accept change, but that I needed to understand that the family's situation had changed, and that I needed to adapt to the new circumstances. Robert fully supported his wife, telling me I should be grateful to have someone willing to take care of the practical details of the house while I focused on William. The situation worsened considerably when Robert took complete control of our bank accounts. He said he had spoken with William and that my husband had agreed to give him power of attorney to manage all family financial matters. When I tried to talk to William about it, he was going through a very difficult phase of treatment, taking strong medications that left him confused and drowsy most of the time. Robert began giving me a monthly allowance of $1,000 from our own savings, telling me it was to keep me from worrying about unnecessary expenses. $1,000 may seem like a lot of money, but for someone who had always had complete control over their own finances, becoming dependent on an allowance from their own son was deeply humiliating. When I questioned why I couldn't continue to access our accounts, Robert patiently explained, as if speaking to a child, that elderly people under emotional stress often make poor financial decisions and that he was simply protecting me from myself. He said he'd read several articles about how widows are often taken advantage of by scammers and that he was taking preventative measures to protect the family's wealth. Jennifer supported me in these conversations, always agreeing with her husband and adding comments about how common it was for people my age to become overwhelmed by complex financial issues. She talked about cases of elderly people she had seen in the hospital who had lost all their SHLs because they could no longer manage their finances properly. I gradually lost my space and autonomy in my own home. Jennifer completely took over the kitchen, cooking only what she and her family liked to eat. When I expressed a craving for a specific dish or tried to cook something for William, she said I was disrupting her routine and that it would be better if I left all the meals to her. Mealtimes became a constant moment of embarrassment. Jennifer served the dishes for herself, Robert, and the children, always forgetting to prepare a portion for me. When I complained, she apologized by saying she'd been distracted or that she didn't know I was hungry. Little by little, I began to feel like an intruder at my own dinner table. The situation became even more painful when Jennifer began controlling my interactions with my grandchildren. She set rigid schedules for everything in the children's lives, and these schedules never included free time for them to spend with me. Emma and Michael were always busy with activities supervised by Jennifer or had to be quiet so as not to disturb their sick grandfather. When I offered to babysit while Jennifer went out or rested, she always had an excuse. She'd say I was too tired because of William's situation or that the kids were too agitated and it would be better for her to take care of them herself. Gradually, my relationship with Emma and Michael became distant and formal, a far cry from the loving closeness we'd always shared. What hurt me most was realizing that Jennifer was teaching the children to treat me differently. Emma, who always ran to hug me when I arrived home, began greeting me with a polite but distant wave. Michael seemed afraid to make a sound around me, as if I were a fragile piece of furniture that could break at any moment. Robert was completely supportive of his wife's actions. When I tried to talk to him about how I felt excluded from the family routine, he told me I was being dramatic and that I should be grateful for having such a dedicated daughter-in-law. He argued that Jennifer was making a huge sacrifice caring for a sick father-in-law and 2 young children, and that I should be more understanding of the stress she was facing. It was during this time that I began to overhear conversations between Robert and Jennifer about the future. They always spoke in low voices, but the walls in my house weren't as thick and my bedroom was close to theirs. In the wee hours of the morning when William was sound asleep due to pain medication, I'd hear discussions about plans that gave me goosebumps. Jennifer spoke openly about traveling to Europe after William died. She wanted to visit France, Italy, and Spain, a 12-month trip that would cost around $50,000. Robert dreamed of buying a bigger house, perhaps a mansion, in an even more upscale neighborhood. They discussed trading in cars again, investing in tech stocks, perhaps buying a beach house in the Caribbean. At no point in these conversations did they mention what would happen to me after William's death. It was as if I would simply disappear or be content to live off their goodwill for the rest of my life. When I summoned the courage to ask indirectly about my plans for the future, Robert always reassured me that I had nothing to worry about, that they would always take care of me. But his tone wasn't comforting. It was condescending and patronizing, as if he were assuming responsibility for a child incapable of caring for himself. Jennifer added that I would always be welcome in their home and that I would never want for anything. These words sounded like threats disguised as kindness. The final straw came one December night in 2022, 2 years after they had moved into our home. William was going through a particularly difficult phase of his treatment, sedated most of the time due to the intense pain. I had just given him his nighttime medication and was returning to my room when I overheard a conversation between Robert and Jennifer that left me completely devastated. They were researching nursing homes and assisted living facilities online. Jennifer read aloud the features of different establishments, commenting on prices, location, and quality of services. Robert asked questions about which would be the best option, whether something closer or further from the city would be better. Jennifer said it would be best for everyone if I were admitted immediately after William's funeral. She argued that I would receive specialized professional care and that they would have the privacy they needed to rebuild their family life. Robert completely agreed, saying that with the inheritance money, they could afford a very comfortable place for me and I wouldn't even notice the difference. They coldly discussed how to convince me to voluntarily accept hospitalization. Jennifer suggested they could argue that I was emotionally weakened by the loss of my husband and that I would need specialized care to overcome my depression. Robert thought the idea was a good one and suggested they could even obtain a medical report justifying hospitalization. The conversation continued for over an hour with them, planning every detail of how they tove. If you're using like a scanner of how they would see, I'll look scanner app and it's like, we're gonna die. Like, look at this. Look at this. And we let it tunt. We all love. And we all know I've been exploring that path. The conversation continued for these all contams at tours of day. Oh, a love. Come with Deleuze. F-A-F. F or a Y. Come qui de pad by the sagdilatif. Guy cuff. To it come with kun with con with siv with two with we kake can we see it a kai de we so de kukui to kai do you cut it I can you just sit a you you to ice to shit you to the I to guy you I could I would freak if to sort of see what the for I'm gonna that confused with to the would get rid of me after William's death. They talked about selling our house and using the money to buy something bigger and better. They discussed how to divide the assets, what investments to make, how to ensure the children had access to the best private schools. That night, I cried until I had no tears left. 42 years of marriage. A lifetime dedicated to family, and I was about to be discarded like an old piece of furniture no longer needed. The pain of betrayal was almost physical, as if someone were squeezing my chest. I thought of all the sacrifices William and I had made for Robert over the years, all the love and money invested in him. And to discover that he was planning to throw me into a nursing home was devastating. Over the next few weeks, I tried to observe their behavior more closely to make sure I hadn't imagined or exaggerated what I'd heard. But the more I paid attention, the more evidence I found that they really were planning to discard me as soon as William died. Robert began commenting on how forgetful and confused I was becoming. When I asked about an object that had gone missing from its usual location, he'd say, I'd moved it and forgotten where I'd put it. When I complained about not receiving my monthly allowance on time, he'd sigh patiently and say he'd already given me the money the week before. Jennifer began to tell visitors how worried she was about my emotional state. She said I was too attached to William and that it would be difficult for me to accept his death when the time came. She planted the idea that I would probably need professional psychological help to cope with the loss. The few friends who still visited me began to comment on changes in my behavior. They said I seemed quieter, sadder, less engaged in conversation. What they didn't know was that I was being constantly monitored and controlled by Robert and Jennifer, who always found an excuse to interrupt or cut short my visits. It was at this point that I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to talk honestly with William about my fears and what I had learned about Robert and Jennifer's plans. I waited for a time when William was lucid and not taking very strong medication. One January afternoon when Robert and Jennifer had taken the kids out for a shopping trip. I sat by William's bedside and told him everything. I talked about the conversations. I'd overheard about their plans to commit me to a nursing home, about how they were controlling my life, and making me feel like a stranger in my own home. William listened in silence, his expression one of sadness and disappointment that I'll never forget. When I finished, he held my hand with what little strength he had left and said he'd always suspected our son's true intentions, but he hoped he was wrong. He apologized for not realizing what was happening sooner and for allowing Robert to take control of our finances. It was then that William told me something that changed everything. He said he had already changed his will several months ago without telling anyone, not even me. During one of his doctor's appointments, when he was feeling particularly lucid, he had asked Dr. Stevens to recommend a trusted attorney, Mr. Thompson. An estate planning attorney had come to the hospital to talk to William about his concerns. William explained that he had noticed Robert's growing greed over the years, but initially believed it was just immaturity that would be outgrown over time. When Robert took control of the family finances, claiming to want to protect him, William realized his son's intentions were far more sinister than he had imagined. William's new will left the entire estate to me with specific clauses that would prevent Robert from contesting the decision or trying to pressure me into transferring the assets to him. William had taken several legal precautions to ensure that I would have full control over our estate and could make whatever decisions I saw fit regarding the family's future. William told me he trusted me completely to manage our fortune responsibly and fairly. He knew I wouldn't leave Robert destitute, but neither would I allow him to continue taking advantage of the family's generosity. The will also included a fund for the grandchildren's education, ensuring that Emma and Michael would have the resources to attend top universities regardless of their parents' financial decisions. In that moment, I felt a mixture of relief, gratitude, and sadness that's hard to describe. Relief knowing that William loved me enough to protect me even after his death. Gratitude for having a husband who knew me so deeply and trusted me so much. Sadness at discovering that our own son was willing to discard me like trash after a lifetime of dedication to family. William asked me not to tell anyone about the new will, not even Robert. He said he wanted the reading of the will to be a complete surprise, a final lesson for our son about the consequences of greed and lack of character. He believed that perhaps the shock of losing the inheritance could serve as an awakening for Robert, making him mature and become a better person. Over the weeks following our conversation, William's health deteriorated rapidly. The cancer had spread further than doctors expected, and treatments were no longer controlling the pain. He became sedated almost constantly, waking only for a few minutes to take medication or try to eat something. Robert and Jennifer tightened their control over my routine during this final phase. They claimed I was too emotionally fragile to make important decisions about William's care. Jennifer took full responsibility for administering his medications and attending his medical appointments, always returning with brief reports of what the doctors had said. When I asked to attend the appointments in person, Robert said it would be too painful for me to see the doctors confirm that there was no hope. He argued that it was better for me to stay home and rest and let them deal with the practical and difficult issues. At the time, I thought it was considerate, but later realized they wanted complete control over all information about William's health. On a cold February morning in 2023, William couldn't wake up. During the previous night, he had stopped responding to stimuli and his breathing had become increasingly shallow. Dr. Stevens, who had been making weekly house calls, confirmed that William had slipped into a coma and would likely last no more than a few hours. Sadly, William passed away that afternoon with his entire family by his side. It was a moment of indescribable pain for me, losing the man who had been my companion for over 4 decades. But at the same time, I felt a strange sense that he had passed away peacefully, knowing he had taken all the necessary precautions to protect me from what was to come. Robert and Jennifer took complete charge of the funeral arrangements, claiming I was in shock and couldn't handle the practical details. They chose the cemetery, the casket design, the flowers, the officiant, and the catering company for the post-burial lunch. All decisions were made without my consultation, always with the excuse that they were trying to spare me additional stress. The funeral cost $15,000 paid for, with money from our accounts that Robert was controlling. It was a beautiful ceremony with expensive flowers and an elaborate lunch for over 100 people. But it didn't reflect William's simple and modest personality, who always preferred practicality and simplicity. During the wake, I overheard several conversations that made me even more indignant. Jennifer was talking to her friends about her and Robert's plans to completely renovate the house once I moved to a smaller place more suitable for an elderly widow. Robert was talking to his colleagues about the investments he planned to make with his inheritance, mentioning tech stocks and the possibility of buying rental properties. They talked about these plans in front of me as if I wasn't listening or as if my opinions weren't relevant. It was as if I had already died along with William and they were just waiting for the right moment to dispose of my body as well. A week after the funeral, we were called to Mr. Thompson's office for the official reading of the will. Robert had insisted we schedule the meeting as soon as possible, claiming we needed to resolve the legal issues quickly so we could move on with our lives. Jennifer had even gone to the hairdresser the day before the meeting, getting her nails done and choosing a new dress for the occasion. On the day of the will reading, Robert and Jennifer arrived at the lawyer's office dressed as if they were going to a celebration. Robert wore a new suit I'd never seen before, probably bought with my allowance money. Jennifer wore an elegant navy blue suit and carried an expensive designer handbag. They were visibly excited, barely able to hide their anticipation for the millions they believed they would receive. I arrived a few minutes after them wearing a simple black dress I'd worn to the funeral. I was nervous but also curious to see their reaction when they learned the truth. Mr. Thompson welcomed us into his elegant office with bookshelves filled with law books and framed diplomas on the walls. The lawyer began by explaining that William's will had been recently updated and that there were some surprises no one was expecting. Robert settled back in his chair with a confident smile, crossing his legs and leaning back as if he owned the world. Jennifer held her purse in her lap and smiled nervously, already mentally calculating how much money they would receive. Mr. Thompson began reading the charitable donations. William had left $50,000 to the church where we were married, $25,000 to a local orphanage, and another $25,000 to a hospital that had cared for him so well during his treatment. Robert tapped his foot impatiently, clearly irritated by what he considered a waste of money that should have gone to his family. Next came the donations to longtime company employees. William had left $10,000 to each of the 5 employees who had worked for him for over 10 years. He had also left $5,000 to Maria, the lady who had cleaned our house once a week for over 15 years. Robert rolled his eyes, muttering something about how his father was being too generous to strangers. Finally, Mr. Thompson reached the main part of the inheritance. He began by listing all the assets that made up William's estate. The house where we lived valued at $2.5 million. The bank accounts and investments totaling $1,800,000. The construction company shares valued at $5,200,000. 3 commercial properties totaling $4 million. 2 vacation homes worth $800,000 each. The total fortune was nearly $15 million, far more than I'd imagined we'd accumulated over the years. Robert leaned back in his chair with that arrogant smile I mentioned at the beginning of this story. Jennifer clutched her purse to her chest, trying to contain the excitement of becoming a multimillionaire. It was at that moment that Robert said out loud, as if he were the king of the world, "The millions are finally mine." He spoke with such arrogance and contempt that even Mr. Thompson seemed shocked by his tone. Jennifer smiled and held her husband's hand, whispering something about finally being able to live the way they always deserved. It was as if I wasn't even in the room. They talked about the inheritance as if it were a birthday present they'd been waiting for years. They showed no respect for William's memory or any consideration for my feelings as a recent widow. It was then that Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, looked directly at me, and uttered the words that changed everything forever. "She is the true heir," he said, pointing directly at me. "Margaret Patterson will receive the entire estate left by William Patterson without exception or restriction." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert opened his mouth but couldn't say anything. The arrogant smile instantly disappeared from his face, replaced by a look of shock and disbelief. Jennifer went pale as if she'd seen a ghost, her expensive purse falling to the floor beside her chair. Mr. Thompson continued explaining the details of the will. William had made it clear that I would have full control over all assets, including the construction company. There were also specific clauses preventing any challenge to the inheritance based on medical evaluations that demonstrated William's full mental capacity at the time the new will was drawn up. The lawyer then took out a sealed envelope and said that William had left a letter to be read only at that moment in the presence of the entire family. He opened the envelope and began reading the letter my late husband had written, especially for this occasion. The letter began with a declaration of love for me, explaining that I had been the most important person in his life and that I deserved to live with dignity and security for the rest of my days. William wrote about our 42 years of happy marriage, how I had always supported him through difficult times, and how I deserved to be cared for and respected in my old age. William then addressed Robert directly, explaining that he had discovered his true intentions regarding the inheritance. He specifically mentioned plans to commit me to a nursing home, talks of selling our house and getting rid of me as a burden. William wrote that he had always loved his son deeply, but that he could not allow me to be treated with disrespect after a lifetime of dedication to the family. The letter went on to explain that the inheritance was not a reward for being a son, but a responsibility that should be given only to those who demonstrated sufficient character to manage it wisely and fairly. William wrote that he hoped the loss of the inheritance would serve as a lesson to Robert about the consequences of greed and disregard for others. Finally, William addressed his grandchildren, explaining that he had created a $500,000 education fund that they could access when they turned 18, specifically to pay for college and other education. This fund was legally protected and could not be touched by Robert and Jennifer, ensuring that Emma and Michael would have educational opportunities regardless of their parents' financial decisions. When Mr. Thompson finished reading the letter, Robert exploded. He abruptly rose from his chair and began shouting that this was unfair, that he was the legitimate son and entitled to his father's inheritance. He accused William of being manipulated by me, claiming that I had convinced my ailing husband to change his will against his own family. Jennifer cried profusely, unable to form coherent words. She babbled about how they had sacrificed years of their lives to care for William and me, and how unfair it was that they would get nothing in return. She even mentioned the money they had spent, selling their home to move into ours, as if they had made some kind of investment that was now being lost. Mr. Thompson calmly explained that the will was perfectly legal and that there was no possibility of a successful challenge. William had taken all necessary precautions, including multiple medical evaluations that proved his full mental capacity at the time of drafting the new will. He had even recorded a video explaining his decisions as further proof that he was fully conscious and rational. Robert tried to convince me to voluntarily relinquish the inheritance. He said everything could continue exactly as it was, that they would continue living with me and taking care of all the practical details of my life. He promised that I would always be treated with respect and affection, that I would never want for anything. Jennifer joined her husband's pleas, promising to be more attentive and considerate to me from now on. She said she had learned her lesson about the importance of treating the elderly with dignity and would do everything differently if I gave them a second chance. She even knelt beside my chair, begging for forgiveness and promising to be an exemplary daughter-in-law. But it was too late. I had seen their true colors over the past few years. I had heard the talk of committing me to a nursing home. I had experienced firsthand what it was like to be treated like a nuisance in my own home. I had experienced the humiliation of receiving an allowance from my own money. There was no going back after everything they had put me through. At that moment, I felt a mix of emotions that are difficult to describe. On the one hand, profound sadness at discovering that my own son was willing to discard me like trash. On the other, enormous relief at knowing that William loved me so much that he took steps to protect me even after his death. And above all, an empowerment I had never felt before in my life. For the first time in decades, I had real power to make decisions about my own destiny. I no longer depended on anyone's goodwill. I didn't have to accept disrespect or manipulation. I didn't have to live in fear of the future. At 73 years old, I was finally free to be who I truly was. That same day, I made several decisions that completely changed the course of my life. The first was to ask Robert and Jennifer to move out of my house immediately. He told them they had until the end of the week to pack up and find another place to live. Robert argued that they didn't even have the money to pay a rental deposit since they had sold their own home to move into ours. I replied that they had had years to organize their finances instead of living off their parents, and that now they would have to face the consequences of their choices. I offered to pay for a week's hotel stay while they looked for an apartment to rent, but made it clear that this was the only help they would receive from me at that moment. Jennifer tried to use the children as an argument, saying it wasn't fair that Emma and Michael should suffer because of the adults' decisions. I explained that I would continue to love my grandchildren unconditionally, but that they could no longer be used as instruments of emotional manipulation against me. My second decision was to immediately seek out a family law attorney to help me navigate all the legal aspects of my new situation. Mr. Mitchell, recommended by Mr. Thompson, himself advised me on all my rights as an heir and the best ways to manage the fortune I had received. I discovered through Mr. Mitchell that Robert had used his father's name and a power of attorney to incur numerous debts over the past 2 years. He had taken out personal loans totaling $100,000. Claiming the money would be used for improvements to our home or to pay for special medical treatments for William. In reality, the money had been spent on expensive trips, designer clothes, and other luxuries for himself and Jennifer. With the inheritance now officially in my hands, Robert had no way to pay off these debts. Creditors began pursuing him persistently, and he had to face for the first time in his life the real consequences of his irresponsible financial decisions. The third important decision concerned the future of the construction company William had built over decades. After extensive discussions with Mr. Mitchell and a business advisor, I decided to sell the company to a competitor who had consistently expressed interest in buying it. Peterson Construction, our rival for over 20 years, made a $14 million offer to purchase the entire business. The sale of the company was completed 3 months after William's death. The proceeds, combined with the estate's other assets, totaled nearly $30 million. It was a sum of money I never imagined I would have, but it also represented a huge responsibility to manage properly. Following my financial advisor's advice, I invested most of my money in a diversified portfolio of solid stocks, government bonds, and real estate funds. This conservative investment strategy provides me with a monthly income of approximately $100,000. It's far more than I need to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Of the properties I inherited, I decided to keep only our longtime home and a beach house in Oregon, where William and I used to spend our summers. The other 3 commercial properties and the second vacation home were sold, generating an additional $4 million. That was also invested. During the first few months after the will was read, Robert and Jennifer made several attempts to convince me to change my mind about the inheritance. They alternated between desperate pleas for forgiveness and veiled threats about leaving me completely alone in the world. Robert even said that if I didn't share the inheritance with him, he would ensure I would never see my grandchildren again. This threat hurt me deeply, but it also made me realize the depths of their greed. Using innocent children as weapons in a financial dispute clearly demonstrated the kind of people Robert and Jennifer truly were. Even so, I didn't give in to emotional blackmail. To protect my relationship with Emma and Michael, I've created a $500,000 educational trust for each of them, just as William suggested in his letter. This money is invested in growing and will only be accessible when they turn 18, specifically to pay for higher education or professional training. I also set a clear condition for Robert: if he could stay employed for 2 consecutive years in any legitimate job and demonstrate that he had learned to be financially responsible, I would consider helping him again. Not with large sums, like William used to give, but with the reasonable support parents should give adult children who are genuinely trying to rebuild. To this day, 10 months after the reading of the will, Robert has not been able to hold a job for more than 6 consecutive weeks. He's held jobs as a car salesman, a real estate consultant, an insurance representative, and an administrative assistant, but he's always been fired for lack of commitment or for trying to deceive clients. Jennifer returned to nursing, a profession she had abandoned 15 years earlier when she married Robert. She took a job at a public hospital, working the night shift to earn a bonus. The work was hard and stressful, a far cry from the princess life she was accustomed to living at the expense of her in-laws. They rented a small twelve-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood. It's a simple place but suitable for a family of 4 living on their own. The children had to leave their expensive private school and enroll in the local public school. Emma, now 13, struggled to adapt to the changes. She was accustomed to a life of luxury and privilege, and adjusting to a more modest reality was challenging. But I've also realized that adversity is helping her mature and develop a stronger character. Michael, at 10, seems to be adapting better to the changes. He's made new friends at public school and seems to be learning the value of the simple things in life. When he comes to visit, he enthusiastically tells me about the games he plays at recess and the school projects he's working on. For me, these past 10 months have been a constant discovery of who I truly am when I'm not being controlled or manipulated by others. At 73, I've started doing things I've always wanted to do but never had the courage or opportunity to try. The first thing I did was completely redecorate my home. I removed all the furniture and objects Jennifer had added and restored the original decor that reflected my personality. I reused the fine china I had saved for special occasions, discovering that every day can be special if we choose to make it so. Robert and Jennifer's room was transformed into an art studio where I paint and craft. I've always had a talent for drawing, but I'd never had the time or space to develop it. Now I spend entire mornings painting watercolors, especially landscapes and portraits of my grandchildren. I enrolled in a watercolor painting class at the local community college. It's wonderful to be in a classroom again after more than 50 years learning new techniques and talking to people who share my artistic interests. My teacher, a 60-year-old woman named Dorothy, has become a dear friend. I also started traveling something William and I always planned to do in retirement, but never got around to doing due to his illness. My first trip was to Italy, a country we'd always dreamed of visiting together. I spent 3 weeks visiting Rome, Florence, and Venice, admiring works of art I'd only known through books. The trip to Italy was a transformative experience. I discovered that I'm much more courageous and independent than I imagined. I was able to communicate in basic English, navigate public transportation, try different foods, and make new friends among other tourists. I returned home with renewed confidence in my own abilities. After Italy, I traveled to France visiting Paris and the Provence region. In Paris, I spent a week visiting museums, strolling through the Luxembourg Gardens, and having coffee in small bistros. In Provence, I rented a house for 2 weeks and practiced my painting en plein air, creating watercolors of lavender fields and small medieval towns. I'm currently planning a trip to Spain next fall. I want to visit Madrid, Barcelona, and Seville, especially to see the works of Goya and Picasso in their original museums. I'm also interested in seeing Gaudi's architecture and learning about flamenco culture. In addition to international travel, I've been exploring the United States much more. I visited Yellowstone and Grand Canyon National Parks, places I've always wanted to see. The immensity and beauty of these places made me reflect on how small we are in the face of nature and how important it is to enjoy every moment we have. Another important change in my life was getting involved in volunteer work. I started helping out at a shelter for women, victims of domestic violence, sharing my experience with emotional manipulation to support other women who had gone through similar situations, albeit in different contexts. At the shelter, I work primarily with elderly women who have been financially or emotionally abused by family members. It's shocking how much more common this type of situation is than we imagine. Many of these women have gone through similar experiences to mine, being controlled and manipulated by children, grandchildren, or other relatives who took advantage of their vulnerability. My work at the shelter mainly involves listening to these women, helping them understand that they weren't the ones who failed, and supporting them in the process of rebuilding their self-esteem. I share my own story as an example that it's possible to start over and find happiness even after 70. I also got involved with an organization that teaches financial literacy to seniors. Many people in my generation never learned to manage money independently, especially women who have always depended on their husbands for financial matters. Now I teach other widows how to manage their finances, make safe investments, and protect themselves from scams and manipulation. At home, I hired a wonderful housekeeper named Rosa, a 50-year-old Mexican woman who takes care of the house's maintenance and provides me with pleasant company. Rosa is also a widow and understands perfectly the challenges of rebuilding a life after the loss of a husband. Together, we've created a pleasant routine, cooking different dishes, watching Mexican soap operas, and receiving visits from friends. I discovered I had many true friends who had drifted away during the years Robert and Jennifer controlled my life. They felt unwelcome in my home and gradually stopped visiting. Now that I've regained my independence, I've reconnected with many of those precious friendships. My social circle has expanded significantly. In addition to reconnecting with old friends, I've made new ones through painting classes, volunteer work, and travel. I've discovered that making friends after 70 is perfectly possible when we're open to new experiences and people. I've hosted several gatherings at my home, reviving the tradition of dinners William and I used to host for friends. It's wonderful to have my home filled with laughter, interesting conversations, and the affection of people who value me for who I am, not for what I can offer financially. Emma and Michael visit me twice a month, always accompanied by Jennifer. These are get-togethers I look forward to, where we cook together, do art projects, and they tell me about school and their friends. I avoid talking about family conflicts and focus on creating positive memories with them. Emma is growing into an interesting and intelligent teenager. She has a talent for math and science, and I encourage her to pursue her academic interests. We talk about her career aspirations and the importance of education for independence in adulthood. She expresses interest in becoming an engineer, which fills me with pride. Michael remains a sweet and creative boy. He loves to draw and always brings his artwork to show me. I encourage his creativity, and we even buy him professional art supplies so he can experiment with different techniques. He dreams of being a comic book artist when he grows up. Both children seem to be learning valuable lessons about responsibility and the value of money through the family's now more modest financial situation. Emma told me she's started helping out more with household chores and has learned to appreciate the things she has. Michael said he now understands why he can't have all the toys he wants and is learning to save his allowance to buy the things he really wants. My relationship with Robert remains distant but cordial. He calls me once a month, usually when he's facing some particular financial difficulty. Our conversations are brief and formal, focusing mainly on the children and practical matters. I still hope that one day he'll understand that he needs to build his own life instead of trying to take advantage of others, but I've already learned that I can't force that change. Jennifer seems to be changing more than Robert. She sent me a long letter a few months ago, sincerely apologizing for her behavior over the past few years. In the letter, she acknowledged that she didn't realize at the time how cruel and disrespectful she was being to me. She wrote about how working as a nurse reminded her of the importance of treating older adults with dignity and compassion. While I'm not yet ready to fully forgive, I recognize that Jennifer is making a genuine effort to change. During visits with the children, she is respectful and polite, a far cry from the controlling woman who lived in my home. She also shares information about how the children are adjusting to their new school and how they're coping emotionally with all the family changes. Jennifer recently asked me if I'd consider letting the kids spend a few nights with me during the school holidays. She explained that it would be good for Emma and Michael to have quality time with their grandmother, and it would also offer a break for her and Robert, who are working hard to keep the family finances afloat. I agreed to the proposal, establishing some ground rules about mutual respect and clear boundaries. Emma and Michael spent a week with me during their summer vacation, and it was a wonderful experience for all of us. We went on excursions, watched movies, cooked together, and I taught them basic painting techniques. During this week, I noticed how my grandchildren had matured in the past few months. They were more independent, more grateful for the little things, and more considerate of others' feelings. The financial hardship the family was facing was clearly teaching the children valuable lessons about character and values. Currently, my life is organized in a way that brings me great satisfaction and peace. I wake up every morning knowing that the day belongs entirely to me, that I can make the choices that make me happy without needing anyone's approval or permission. It's a freedom I've never experienced before, even during the happy years of my marriage to William. My mornings usually begin with a specialty coffee I brew with imported beans, sipped from one of the fine cups William gave me for our 10th wedding anniversary. Then I spend a few hours in my studio painting or working on artistic projects that inspire me at the time. Twice a week, I attend art classes at the community college. Besides improving my painting skills, these gatherings are important social opportunities where I connect with interesting people who share similar passions. Our student group has formed a genuine friendship, and we often meet up to paint outdoors or visit museum exhibitions. Afternoons are dedicated to different activities depending on my mood. I might choose to read an interesting book in the comfortable living room chair, work in the garden cultivating the roses that have always been my passion, or go out to lunch with friends at restaurants I've never tried before. I volunteer 3 afternoons a week, alternating between the women's shelter and the financial education organization for seniors. This work gives me a deeply rewarding sense of purpose, knowing that my personal experience can help others overcome similar challenges. Weekends are reserved for special activities. I might choose to travel to my beach house in Oregon, where I paint seascapes and walk for hours in the sand. Or I might host friends and family at home, hosting elaborate dinners or relaxed barbecues in the backyard. I've learned to value my own company in a way I never imagined possible. I spend entire nights reading, watching classic films, or simply gazing at the moonlit garden. I've discovered that solitude isn't necessarily bad when it's a conscious choice, rather than something imposed by others. My financial independence allowed me to explore aspects of my personality that had lain dormant for decades. I discovered my love of classical music and my keen ear for distinguishing different compositions and styles. I purchased a high-quality sound system and spend hours listening to symphonies while I paint. I also developed an interest in gourmet cooking, something I'd never had time to explore properly. I took a French cooking class and learned to prepare elaborate dishes that impress my guests. Cooking became an art form for me, a way to express creativity and affection through food. Gardening has become another important passion. We expanded our home garden, and now I grow not only roses but also herbs, cherry tomatoes, and a variety of seasonal flowers. There's something deeply therapeutic about working with the earth, watching plants grow and flourish under my care. I recently started writing, documenting my experience of personal transformation and the lessons I've learned about resilience and empowerment in later life. My goal is to perhaps publish a book that can inspire others facing similar situations of family abuse or who need to start over in later life. The writing process has been cathartic and revealing. Putting my experience on paper helped me process all the complex emotions I experienced during these difficult years. And it also made me realize how much I've grown as a person. The woman who tolerates disrespect and manipulation no longer exists. In her place has emerged a strong, independent, and confident person. Looking back, I can understand that the painful experience with Robert and Jennifer, while devastating at the time, was ultimately necessary for my personal growth. If they hadn't revealed their true intentions, I probably would have continued living as a dependent and submissive person for the rest of my life. William's legacy to me wasn't just financial. He gave me back my dignity, my autonomy, and my identity. He gave me the opportunity to discover who I truly am when I'm not defined by the roles of wife, mother, or mother-in-law. I discovered Margaret, the person with her own passions, talents, and dreams. Today, I understand that it's never too late to start over. At 74, I celebrated my birthday last month. I feel more alive and authentic than at any other point in my life. I have plans and dreams for the coming years, something I never imagined possible at this stage of my life. My plans include more travel to countries I've always wanted to visit. I'm interested in visiting Japan to learn about Japanese art, especially India ink painting. I also want to explore Greece and its islands painting, Mediterranean landscapes, and visiting archaeological sites I've studied in books. I plan to continue developing my artistic skills, perhaps experimenting with sculpture or ceramics. The community college offers courses in these areas, and I have enough space at home to set up a more complete studio. Art has become a fundamental form of expression for me, and I want to explore all the creative possibilities I've yet to experience. I also plan to increase my involvement in social causes. I'm considering creating a foundation focused on helping elderly women who are victims of domestic abuse. With the financial resources I have available, I can make a significant difference in the lives of people who have gone through similar experiences to mine. The foundation could offer free legal support to women who need to challenge abusive guardianships or recover financial resources stolen by family members. It could also provide temporary housing and psychological support for women who need to escape domestic or family abuse. Robert approached me a few weeks ago with a proposal that was different from his previous attempts to raise money. He said he finally understood the lessons his father wanted to teach him and asked for an opportunity to prove he'd changed. He landed a job as a construction supervisor at a small construction company using the experience he gained from working occasionally at his father's company during his youth. This time, he didn't ask for money directly. Instead, he asked for my help in securing a professional reference to help him advance within his new company. He explained that his boss was considering promoting him to project manager, but wanted to speak with someone who knew his work capacity and character. It was the first time in years that Robert had approached me asking for help building something rather than simply asking for money. I agreed to talk to his boss, but made it clear that I would be honest about both his strengths and weaknesses. I also stipulated that he would have to demonstrate consistency in his work for at least another year before I would consider any other support. Robert's boss, Mr. Rodriguez, seemed serious and hardworking when we spoke on the phone. He said Robert demonstrated adequate technical knowledge and was striving to be punctual and reliable, but that there were still concerns about his ability to lead teams and handle larger responsibilities. I was honest with Mr. Rodriguez about my son's history of financial irresponsibility, but I also mentioned that he had grown up watching his father work in construction and had significant practical knowledge. I suggested that perhaps a gradual promotion with close supervision might be a good way to test his true capabilities. Jennifer has also shown positive changes in recent months. She has dedicated herself completely to her work as a nurse and has received praise from her supervisors for her competence and dedication. During our conversations during children's visits, she demonstrates greater humility and consideration for others. Jennifer recently asked me if I would consider helping her pursue a specialization in geriatric nursing. She explained that working with elderly patients in the hospital made her realize how little she understood about the specific needs of this age group. She wanted to specialize to become a better professional and also to make amends for past mistakes. The course cost $8,000 and would last 6 months with classes on weekends so as not to interfere with her work. Jennifer said she was saving money to pay for the course, but that it would take another 2 years to raise the necessary funds. She wasn't asking for the money directly, just asking my opinion on whether it was worth the investment in her career. I decided to help her with the course, but I set clear conditions. The money would be paid directly to the educational institution, not to Jennifer. She would have to maintain her grades above 80% throughout the course and send me monthly progress reports. Additionally, she would have to volunteer 20 hours a month in nursing homes or senior care centers during the course. The conditions I set for Jennifer weren't just about the money, but about demonstrating a genuine commitment to personal change. Volunteering with seniors would be especially important for her to understand. In practice, how to treat people in this age group with dignity and respect. Jennifer accepted all the conditions without complaint and began the course last month. Her initial reports show that she is taking her studies very seriously and learning valuable lessons. Not only about medical care, but also about empathy and compassion. She wrote that she had never truly understood how small actions can make a huge difference in an elderly person's quality of life. As for the children, they continue to be my greatest joy. Emma excelled at her new school and was accepted into a special program for students with talent in math and science. She excitedly tells me about the science projects she's working on and her plans for college. Michael discovered a talent for music and began learning the guitar. During our visits, he plays the songs he learned and sings along with me. I'm considering paying for professional music lessons for him if his parents agree and if he continues to show interest and dedication. Both children seem to be developing a more mature understanding of money and responsibility. Emma told me she started babysitting neighborhood kids to earn her own spending money. Michael started a small business selling personalized drawings to his schoolmates. It's gratifying to see how adversity is teaching my grandchildren valuable lessons. They're learning the value of hard work, the importance of being grateful for what they have, and how small things can bring great satisfaction. These are lessons I wish Robert had learned when he was young. My own journey of self-discovery continues every day. I recently started practicing meditation, something I'd never considered before. A friend from art school recommended a meditation group for people our age, and I've found that the practice helps me maintain mental clarity and emotional balance. Meditation has taught me to observe my thoughts and emotions without being overwhelmed by them. When I feel anger or sadness related to past experiences with Robert and Jennifer, I can process those feelings in a healthier way. It also helps me stay focused on the present instead of reliving old hurts. I discovered that I have my own spirituality that doesn't necessarily depend on organized religions. I find spiritual connection in nature, art, genuine human relationships, and the contribution I can make to making the world a little better. It's a practical and personal spirituality that brings me inner peace. Physically, I'm also taking better care of myself than at any other time in my life. I hired a personal trainer who specializes in senior exercise, and I exercise regularly 3 times a week. I'm also taking better care of my diet, cooking nutritious and balanced meals. My energy and disposition have improved significantly in the past few months. I wake up every day feeling refreshed and excited about the possibilities the day may bring. It's amazing how the stress of living under control and manipulation had affected my physical health without me realizing it. I recently had a complete medical checkup and all my tests were excellent. My doctor, Dr. Williams, commented that I seemed like a different person compared to my visits in previous years. He said I radiated vitality and joy for life, very different from the tired, depressed woman he used to see. Looking to the future, I feel genuine excitement about the possibilities that still exist for me. At 74, I have plans, dreams, and goals I want to achieve. I don't feel old or limited by age. I feel free and capable of creating the life I truly want to live. One of the most important things I've learned is that age really is just a number when you maintain curiosity, a willingness to learn, and an openness to new experiences. I have 80-year-old friends who are more adventurous and vibrant than the 40-year-olds I've met. The difference lies in mindset and a refusal to conform to unnecessary limitations. My experience has also taught me the importance of having clear boundaries in relationships. For decades, I confused kindness with passivity, love with submission, generosity with permissiveness. Now, I understand that healthy relationships require mutual respect, and that it's possible to be affectionate without accepting disrespect. I established clear boundaries not only with Robert and Jennifer, but in all my relationships. This didn't make me harsh or inflexible, but it did allow me to create more authentic and balanced connections with others. People respect me more because I respect myself first. The transformation I've undergone has also given me a different perspective on money. For most of my life, money was something William managed and something I didn't have to worry about. Now, I understand that financial independence is one of the most important foundations of personal independence, especially for women. I use my experience to teach other women my age about the importance of understanding and managing their own finances. Many of them have never learned about investing, retirement planning, or protecting themselves against financial fraud. It's empowering to see these women gain confidence and knowledge about their own resources. My home has become a place of peace and hospitality again. I regularly receive visits from friends, family, and people I met through volunteer work. It's rewarding to have a home that reflects my personality and values, where people feel welcome and valued. The garden has flourished under my dedicated care. The roses are more beautiful than ever, and I've added beds of aromatic plants and seasonal flowers that attract butterflies and hummingbirds. I spend hours working the land, finding peace and satisfaction in the natural cycle of planting, growth, and flowering. I recently set up a small art studio in the garden, a glass-enclosed space where I can paint with natural light all day long. It's my sacred space where I connect with myself and explore my creativity without interruption. Some of my best paintings have been created in this special space. Art has become not just a hobby, but a form of therapy and personal expression. Through painting, I can process emotions, capture important memories, and create beauty that didn't exist before. It's a way to contribute to the world by leaving something beautiful and meaningful behind. I'm planning my first solo art exhibition for next year. A local gallery that showcases works by community artists took an interest in my watercolors and offered space for a show. It's exciting to think that at 74, I'll be making my debut as a professional artist. The exhibition will include landscapes from my travels, portraits of my grandchildren, and a special series of paintings inspired by my journey of personal transformation. These latter are more abstract, using colors and shapes to express emotions such as liberation, empowerment, and rebirth. My relationship with the local community has also deepened significantly. In addition to volunteering, I've become involved with several civic and cultural organizations. I serve on the public library board, help organize cultural events in the city, and contribute to causes related to education and social welfare. This civic engagement gives me a sense of purpose and connection to something bigger than my personal problems. It's rewarding to use my time and resources to contribute to the well-being of the community where I've lived for decades. I feel like I'm finally giving back all the support I've received over the years. One of the most profound lessons I've learned is that forgiveness doesn't mean accepting abusive behavior or forgetting important lessons. I'm gradually forgiving Robert and Jennifer, not because they deserve it, but because carrying anger and resentment is especially harmful to me. Forgiving doesn't mean I'll trust them blindly again or accept disrespect in the future. It means I choose to release the negative emotional energy that was consuming my inner peace. It's a gradual and conscious process that I undertake primarily for my own well-being. Today, more than a year after the reading of the will that changed my life, I can honestly say that I am a completely different person. The fragile, submissive woman who accepted crumbs of respect in her own home no longer exists. In her place has emerged someone strong, confident, and determined to live authentically. I no longer feel fear about the future or anxiety about how I'll survive. I know I have enough financial resources to live comfortably for the rest of my life, but more importantly, I know I have the personal resources to face any challenge that comes my way. I've discovered an inner strength I didn't know I possessed. My schedule is always packed with activities that bring me joy and fulfillment. Between art classes, volunteer work, meeting friends, traveling, and personal projects, I rarely experience moments of boredom or unwanted loneliness. I've created a rich and meaningful life that reflects my genuine values and interests. My relationship with my grandchildren remains a constant source of joy. They now see me as an interesting and inspiring person, not just a conventional grandmother. We share creative activities, talk about dreams and aspirations, and they look to me for advice on important issues in their lives. Emma recently told me she wants to be like me when she grows up. She said she admires my independence, my courage to try new things, and my ability to reinvent myself at any age. It's one of the greatest honors I've ever received, knowing I can be a positive role model for my granddaughter. Michael also expresses pride in his grandmother, who became an artist and traveler in her early 70s. He tells his friends about my adventures in paintings and often asks me to teach him artistic techniques. It's gratifying to see how my personal transformation can positively influence the next generation. I recently began thinking about the legacy I want to leave for my family and the world. I don't want to be remembered simply as someone who accumulated wealth, but as someone who knew how to use her resources and experiences to make a difference in the lives of others. The book I'm writing about my experience is part of that legacy. I want others facing similar situations to know that it's possible to start over and find happiness even after painful experiences of betrayal and abuse. Age doesn't have to be a limitation when we have determination and courage. The foundation I plan to create will be another important part of my legacy. With the resources I have available, I can help dozens, if not hundreds, of older women escape abusive situations and rebuild their lives with dignity. It's a way to transform my pain into something that can benefit others. Looking back, I can see that everything that happened, even the most painful moments, was necessary for my growth as a person. If William hadn't gotten sick, if Robert and Jennifer hadn't revealed their true intentions, if the will hadn't given me financial freedom, I probably would have remained in the comfort zone of dependence for the rest of my life. Adversity, as difficult as it was at the time, ended up being the catalyst for discovering who I truly am when I'm not being defined by others. It took shedding my identity as a dependent wife and submissive mother to find my identity as Margaret, the complete and autonomous person. William, wherever he is, must be proud to see how I used the opportunity he gave me. I didn't waste the inheritance on self-pity or revenge, but instead turned it into tools for personal growth and social contribution. I believe this was exactly what he hoped for when he made the courageous decision to change his will. The poetic justice of the situation was not lost on me. Robert and Jennifer, who planned to dispose of me in a nursing home while living lavishly on the inheritance, now work hard to support their family while I live the life I always dreamed of. I take no sadistic pleasure in this, but I recognize that sometimes life has its own ways of balancing things out. More important than any satisfaction with justice served is the inner peace I found. I sleep every night knowing I'm respected and valued by the people I choose to have in my life. I wake up every day knowing I have purpose, resources, and opportunities to create meaningful experiences. My current life is a testament to the fact that it's never too late for profound and positive change. At 74, I feel more alive, more authentic, and more hopeful about the future than at any other point in my life. It's a second chance that not everyone gets the opportunity to experience. If you've made it this far on this long journey with me, thank you from the bottom of my heart for accompanying me through every emotion, every discovery, okay, and every transformation I've experienced. I know it's not easy to hear about such painful family conflicts, but I deeply believe that sharing our most difficult experiences can be the greatest gift we can give each other. In the comments, tell me your own story or that of someone you know who has gone through similar situations. Have you ever had to start your life over after your 60s or 70s? Have you faced manipulation or abuse from family members? Or perhaps you know someone who has successfully reinvented themselves in old age. Your experiences may be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find the courage to make necessary changes. If this story touched your heart in any way, please leave a like to help me reach more people who can benefit from this message. Every like means we're spreading hope and inspiration to those who most need to hear that starting over is always possible. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this one. Here you'll find authentic accounts of people who faced their own mountains and discovered they are stronger than they imagined. Each story is a reminder that no matter how old we are, we can always choose to write a new and better chapter in our lives. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to regain your dignity, independence, and joy in life. Sometimes a story like mine can be the spark someone needs to take the first step toward their own transformation. Always remember you deserve to be treated with respect and dignity no matter your age or circumstances. You have the right to your own life, your own choices, and your own happiness. And if I was able to start over at 73, believe that you can start over at any time you choose. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. Until our next story, may you have the courage to write your own story of transformation and empowerment. A warm hug from someone who learned that life truly begins when we decide we deserve to be happy.